Welcome back to the One podcast. My name's Isaac Kamens. This week we begin a series on Wang Jing, one of the well-known martial artists out of Taiwan. He was first profiled in Robert Smith's book. In this episode, we talk about the article in Bagua Journal that focuses on him. And we specifically get into his connection with the founder of the Zhang Bagua school, Zhang Feng, and their connection through the Yiguan Dao organization, which is a Taoist religious organization. So we talk about that. We also talk about their connection through martial arts and their sort of experience in Taiwan in the early 50s. And then this week in our Patreon episode, we begin a series on an article that Bruce Francis wrote in the Inside Kung Fu magazine in 1992, in which he talks about what he calls Qi disease. And this sort of set off a little bit of a controversy. So in this episode, we give a little bit of background to the stuff he's talking about and talk about the spiraling energy body, which we did a whole series on way back in a couple of years ago. So you can check that out as well. There's a link in the show notes. So hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.
Continuing our discussion of some of the great masters of martial arts from Taiwan, we spent a lot of time on the Yizhang school of Zhang Feng and some of the prominent students such as Lo Dexiu, Sudong Chen, and Heng Yixiang, who all descend from that side of things in Taiwan. And we wanted to touch on another of the great teachers, Master Wang Jing. And he's first mentioned in Robert Smith's book from the 60s, Chinese Boxing, which kind of was one of the first introductions to internal martial arts in the West. And since then, there's been more and more information about him that came out. So where he crosses over with what we were talking about before is his relationship with the founder of the Yizhang system, Zhang Feng, in Taiwan. And both of these guys came to Taiwan right before the end of World War II or the end of the Chinese Civil War. And they became friends and made connections together at that time period. So in looking at Bagua Journal, Volume 3, Number 5 from 1993, tells the story of Zhang Feng and his connection with this teacher, Wang Jing, and how they interacted. So it starts by saying, around the same time that Zhang Feng started teaching internal martial arts in Taipei and founded the Yizhang Martial Arts School, his friend Wang Jing began teaching in the Taichung area and founded the Chen Ming Martial Arts School. When Wang started teaching, he also had problems with local martial artists challenging him, and would often call on his friend Zhang to come down south and help him out. Wang had studied Xingyi and Bagua with Zhang Zhaodong in China before coming to Taiwan. Zhang and Wang had a common bond in the internal arts. However, they also had a strong bond through their involvement in Yiguan Dao, the religious movement. Although Zhang Feng was Wang's senior in boxing, Wang Jing held a higher position in the Yiguan Dao, and thus the two considered themselves brothers. So these guys both followed the same religion, and so in that way they were connected, but they also liked the same types of martial arts. So in that way they were connected, and it sounds like they both got involved in some challenge matches when they first opened their schools in Taiwan, because the locals are never happy when a new master shows up and starts teaching. And this we read about that in Blurred Boundaries quite a bit, where thugs and other rival schools would start beef with a new teacher when he first came out.
Yeah, imagine the combined weight of those two coming in school and challenging you.
They're both big dudes. For Chinese men of that era, they're both large men. So I'm sure they were able to make their way.
I'm sure they bonded over, basically a common experience, right? Like you both came from the same place and, kind of had to leave for the same reason and ended up in the same place. And
yeah, they both came to Taiwan from Tianjin.
Just had an earthquake.
Oh.
We had one this morning.
Really?
It was
oh dear.
This was a little one. All right, never mind.
Just a little dinky one. So it says, so talking more about Wang Shujin. So Wang Shujin was brought to Taiwan in 1948 by a local leader of the Iguandao religious movement in Taiwan, Zhou Shen. In 1947, a prominent Iguandao leader had died in the mainland, and the funeral was held in Shanghai. So followers of Iguandao came from all over China attending the funeral to pay their respects. Zhou Shen met Wang Shujin while in Shanghai attending the funeral and invited him to come to Taiwan the next year to help spread the teaching of Iguandao. Shortly after Wang arrived in Taiwan, Zhou found him a place to live in Taichung, which is down in southern Taiwan. So it sounds like he came to Taiwan to do religion rather than martial arts, or Zhang Jinfeng came to Taiwan to be a fruit seller and sort of a tradesman,
Right. It was,
and then ended up
well, I
teaching.
think you can get any job you could take, right?
Well, I mean, this is before the end of the war, right? So it was like people were coming to Taiwan. There was no sense yet that there was going to be this big retreat, right? These guys came, yeah, the
Uh,
retreat's not till
40 by 40
1949.
by 47, I think that the writing was on the
No,
wall.
I don't think so. They were still planning to win. That I think
I
the
mean, that's
nationalists kept
when,
it quiet because they didn't want anyone to know they were going to
well, they
bail.
may have kept it quiet, but that's when Chim Ching went around then. I
Uh,
think that the first
People were
wave
starting
of
to show up.
was starting to show up around 47. Yeah. The big one happened in 49, but I think there was a kind of an earlier. And it sounds like, I mean, if you're a religious movement in China in 1947, it doesn't matter which side wins. It's not going to go well,
Well, I
right?
think Guangdao is interwoven with nationalists, with the Guomingdang. A bunch
Right.
of those guys are
But,
involved in it.
but meaning it's still not,
They
you know,
might turn on you any second,
yeah,
basically.
it's not great. Where if you go and you say, okay, let's, go over here and do our thing with these, they're less likely to screw you or
Right.
turn on you or
Especially if
whatever.
communism wins, who have banned religion on
Right.
penalty of
And that's
death.
where
So
I
there's
think,
that.
like I said, I think by 47, they were like, hey, we might not want to be here when this goes down. I mean, it's like kind of like now, where certain groups are looking at it like maybe the next few years might be kind of rough. They may not have thought that they were going to be there permanently, but they were
Yeah,
definitely looking at it like, let's see what happens. Let's sort of, because it's that 38 to 49 that things were really up in the air as far as who was gonna, where things were gonna land. And so, yeah, I
definitely.
think if you had the means to remove yourself from it, you took the chance. And it sounds like religious organizations they tend to have money too.
Sure.
So there's that. So they
Yeah, and I imagine people were going to Hong Kong, going to the States, going to
right. And
Australia. They're going to
who
anywhere
are
they
the
could
first
go.
people they're going to get out? They're going to get out the guys who are up higher up, if you will, right? And it sounds like
Sure.
case of Wong, it was that thing of like, let's get him out of here before something bad happens. Because he was also a martial artist, which wasn't a good thing to be the
Right. That
communist
didn't look
one
good
either.
either. Yeah. It is said that one reason that Wang Shijin invited Zhang Jinfeng down to his school to help him, quotes, mind the fort during the challenge period was because he often injured people in challenge matches. When Wang fought, he hit hard, and he did not hold back. When someone got hurt, Zhang Jinfeng would attend to them utilizing his knowledge of bone setting, massage, and Chinese herbal medicine. Wang Shijin and Zhang Jinfeng were said to have fought and won many challenges during this period of time, from the late 1940s to the early 1950s. Although nothing was ever officially documented, stories of this time period are abundant. Both their reputations grew, and large numbers of students started studying the internal martial arts. The people in South and Central Taiwan studied with Wang Shijin, and the people in Northern Taiwan studied with Zhang Jinfeng. So that's interesting. It sounds like Wang Shijin was vicious fighter, but not very good at Chinese medicine. So he
Right.
had to
Like,
call his friend to come down and patch people
it's
up.
funny. So
Which
they're
is,
like,
that way you win the fight and you don't have to pay
don't
the
get
penalty.
sued.
Yeah, you don't get sued or jailed for hurting this person. So that sounds like the way to go. And and they both fought and won many challenge matches during that period. And there's a few stories here and there, but those aren't very well documented, unfortunately. But it sounds like it worked to get students in the schools. Like traditionally, I mean, you win fights and that gets you students. So
Yep.
that's how it was done back in the day. It says even up to for years later, Wang was still asking Zhang Jinfeng to come down south and help him with challenges. Sometimes Zhang Jinfeng would stay there for a month at a time. Zhang's wife states that it was an unsettled life for newlyweds, and she didn't like it. She said she didn't know why he had to go off and fight everyone. When she complained, Zhang Jinfeng would say, "You don't understand." It is said that Wang and Zhang practiced and researched Bagua Zhang and Xing Yichuan together quite often during Zhang's visits down south. So that's the connection between Wang Shujin and the Yizong movement. They were both, it sounds like Zhang Jinfeng was a little bit of the big brother there, the Yizong master, but they were the same generation overall when you look at it. So I
Well,
think,
again, it sounds like they considered each other equals because
yeah,
that when you meet somebody who's got the same interests that you do and
yeah,
they're the same age, there's like a hey, you kind of well that or you hate each other. I mean,
right. A lot of
those are
times it's that,
those are
but
your
if
two options,
if you're
right?
helping each other fight off crowds of ruffians and challengers, then you end up with a pretty strong bond. Although I don't think these two schools have much of a connection to this day. I think, like Kumar always said, when he trained with Zhang Zhifeng's student, you weren't allowed to talk about Wang Shijin. You weren't allowed to even say that name, or he'd get mad.
Right. Well, yeah.
So typical martial arts scene, a lot of
But that's why I think this is kind of a cool story because it
yeah,
shows that like a lot of times it's not the teachers who don't get along, it's the students,
right. Ain't
Uh,
that the truth? Ain't
yeah,
that the truth?
whatever.
That's a Chinese martial arts thing. So, with that introduction, let's look at the life of Wang Shijing and his Baguazhang, as reported in Baguazhang Journal, Volume 5, Number 6, from 1995. And this is back in the heyday of Bagua Journal when Dan was publishing just tons of awesome material, going to China a lot, going to Taiwan a lot, and to this day remains the best resource on the masters of Baguazhang, basically, period. It's just,
Second best.
well, what's the first best?
This podcast.
This podcast is primarily based on Bagua Journal. So Wang Shujin is a generation of somewhere around 1904 to 1981. So here's another example of a master who lived through this tumultuous period. He's born before the end of the Qing dynasty, so he's born under the emperor. Goes through all the brutality of, he's born directly after the Boxer Rebellion, just like Liu Hongzhi, the old master we've
Hmm.
talked about in multiple seasons. Is that the same year he's born as well?
No, he's born in '03.
Oh, three. Okay. So those guys are the same era.
Yeah.
So they were exposed to masters who'd learned in the 1800s, basically. So in their
Well, they were sort of, I
education,
mean, they were both part of, so Wang Shujing was part of the what's known as the Warriors Association, which was the big thing in Tianjin that his teacher
Zhang
Zhang
Jiaodong.
Xiaodong was the founder of, and then Liu Hongzhi was part of the Esteeming the Martial Society, which was the Beijing sort of like sister school that was formed a few years later. That was Li Tsunyi's kind of uh, connection to that. So it was Li Tsunyi, Zhang Xiaodong, and a couple other guys were the founders of this thing, and then like Han Musha was one of them.
Hmm.
And so they started this thing in Tianjin first, and then it moved to Beijing later. But those were the big like they were the internal martial arts equivalent of the Jingwu essentially.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Because they each of them gathered a number of top masters, and
Well,
that's where there's this fusion between Bagua and Xingyi and Tai Chi
most
all
of
coming and
them
mixing together.
most of them started as like guest instructors at the Jingwu and then thought, this is a good idea, and so they formed their own.
Hmm.
Um, Liu Duquan's son was
Right.
another guy. Um, can't remember blanking on his name, but
Yeah, there's a bunch of other guys
that's the
who,
guy that's in our podcast logo.
right. And so Wang Shujin and Liu Hongzhi and these other guys they were young men, part of these associations
Right.
or
And
associated
then
with these
what happened
associations.
is when these associations disbanded, quote unquote, a lot of these guys stayed on with their teachers.
I
Would
mean,
have
I suppose the chaos of the 1920s during the warlord period and then the 30s of the war with Japan made I assume that's what made those
yeah,
associations kind of crumble. Or maybe they were a
yeah.
victim of their own success a little bit because they were so effective that those teachers all branched out and sort of formed their own official schools and they didn't need that
No,
association anymore,
most of it was war though. I mean, it's just, that whole thing
right?
of like um
Society basically just getting rocked.
crumbling. Yeah, but there was also this piece about um so like Liu Hongjia's teacher, Liu Jinglin, he was an instructor at one of these places in Beijing, and when it ended, he started his own school. But that was like it was like me. He taught in his living room. He didn't have a
Right,
big, giant
right,
government sponsored building
right.
anymore. It
He
was,
became less, more behind the
and
scenes,
that's where
smaller
that
club.
sort of quote golden age of internal martial arts kind of ends in like 28, 29, somewhere around there, and then it shifts to more of a small sort of indoor schools and
Scattered
things like,
kind of,
yeah.
yeah. And yeah, more individualized, just due to the pressures of the time for sure.
And I think a similar thing was happening in Taiwan. I mean, it sounds like there were initially these guys were able to have these sort of big schools, and then by the 1970s and
60s,
80s,
70s, yeah, they
it
were doing
had
their
got,
own. Well, yeah, maybe small, like they each became individuals rather than sponsored by the Guomindang
right,
government. At first, they sort of like, okay, here's the official teachers. And then as the
right.
70s and 80s went on, they started going on their own ways. So yeah, interesting. So it says that one of the most prominent martial artists who came to Taiwan in the late 1940s was Wang Shujing. Not really known for his martial arts on the mainland, Wang was from Tianjin and had studied Bagua and Xingyi in Tianjin with the famous Zhang Dong while he was living there and working as a carpenter. Although Wang started studying with Zhang Dong in 1923 at the age of 18, his close friend Zhou said that Wang never became one of Zhang Dong's inner door disciples. And so that's interesting. I think Zhang Dong had open school that for to the public.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's what we were just talking about.
right.
But
And so Wang studied at that school, but he didn't necessarily learn from Zhang Dong himself. Maybe he learned from his son or from one of the assistant instructors rather than the main teacher. Or maybe he learned sometimes from the main teacher, but
yeah, I think
class was conducted by the juniors
I'm
usually.
almost positive that it was probably the senior students like, Han Musha and guys like that who were Zhang Zhaodong students that ran the classes,
Right. Those are the
and
guys
then
running the class.
you know the Grand Master would come in sometimes and smack people around,
Right. And
with
as we
like,
both know, sometimes the official disciples aren't always the best ones. And, you can get as good an education if you apply yourself. You don't have to be the
sure, yeah,
closest
yeah.
disciple to be the
Well,
best
and
one.
right, I mean that part has nothing to do with fighting abilities or anything
Right.
like that. It just means you got
Well,
the
it can, because if the teacher does beat you up, you tend to absorb those skills. But
yeah, but I mean, it could also be that like you just don't want it to be your profession, so you don't care about having a piece of paper on, because like if you're doing other things, right? I mean, especially if like you're a Taoist priest or whatever, like Wang Shujing was. So, but who knows? I mean, I don't, it's like this is 100 years ago, so it's
been a
hard to
while.
say.
Right. So he started studying 1923. So yeah, literally 102 years ago. Wow.
He's 18 100 years ago,
Yeah.
and that's where I think again a lot of these guys they may have started in a formal capacity somewhere, but like Wang Jing goes on and trains with other people, and most of these guys didn't just do one thing and then like stop. It was like it was their whole life's kind of, and that's why I think that that community of that picture and masters and methods, all those
Right.
guys were in that picture together because they were all buds, they kind of I mean, I don't know how much they liked each other personally,
Right.
but they
They kind of needed each other a little bit.
yeah, I mean, it's like any, it's like a union or,
Yeah.
something, right? Like you know that as a group you're going to do better, you know, financially essentially, and it
Right.
gives you some support, especially like you have guys, gangsters coming to your school. It
Right.
might be nice to have a
And
couple of
also
friends.
living under fascism, a fascist dictatorship. If you have an association, you guys can become official and have a government stamp of approval. Everyone,
Right.
we're official. Here's my official identity card. Like
Sure.
you're not a threat. So by being part of that group, you can kind of protect yourselves from
Hmm.
arbitrary arrest.
And there were a lot of military guys involved too, so
Absolutely. So that gives you kind of some cover.
yeah.
So another thing about Wang Shujing, it said Wang Shujin had also had occasion to study with his teacher Zhang's friend Wang Shangzai, the originator of the Yichuan system, for a full year in 1934. So that's the standing postures and holding postures system that comes from Xingyi that Wang Shangzai is famous for. So it says that Wang Shujin later taught Wang Shangzai standing methods in Taiwan and felt that standing practice was an important part of any martial arts training. Um, So that's an interesting piece, and I know that that's one of the things Kumar really adopted from Wang Shujin was that love of the standing postures and the power and the stability and structure that comes from that.
Well, I think
And
most of Wang Jing students do some kind of standing, it's kind of the,
oh, for sure,
you know,
all of them,
yeah.
absolutely. No, he made it part of the curriculum, and we never learned that Wang Shujin Bagua from Kumar, but we did learn those standing postures of Wang Shangzai.
We did the single poem with Marnix that one time.
Yeah, that's true. Marnik shows the single. Wang Shujin studied with other peoples as well, other styles as well. Um, it also said that he studied with Chen Panling, the famous Tai Chi teacher, and that's the style of Tai Chi that he taught in Taiwan. So that's where the Chen Panling style was quite popularized. Also, Hung Yishang of the Yizang school, he also taught that same
Yeah, that's,
Chen
I
Panling
mean,
Tai Chi.
in some ways, that was the Taiwan branded Tai Chi form in a,
Yeah, Robert Smith says that everyone, when he was in Taiwan, everyone would always say, "Oh, go, you should go talk to Chen Panling. He's kind of the boss." Like they would always give him respect,
yeah.
is the impression you get in that book. So the next thing it says is that Wang Shujin was probably better known than his fellow mainland contemporaries in Taiwan to those in the West who practiced Bagua and Xingyi because he lived longer than most of them, and he was featured in Robert Smith's books, as well as teaching many foreigners, both Westerners and Japanese. His 5'8", 260-pound frame was also not easily overlooked. And yeah, Master Wong was a big, rotund, rounded, squinty-eyed, he looks pretty imposing. And he
Yeah.
is a pretty bad mofo. And he's the one who's famous for letting you punch him wherever and however you want,
Right. So
and
the
then inflicting retaliation
in
afterward.
power not in Masters and Methods, there's that famous picture of Hung Yisheng punching Wang Shujing, right? So it's
To little effect.
yeah.
And Hung Yishang is a street fighting bruiser, so
I
that
mean,
definitely
I
counted
don't
for
know.
something.
He may not have shown it then, but I bet he felt it in the morning. Like
Yeah, he didn't show anything. He's stoic as hell, but he definitely felt it.
uh,
So, although Wang was a prominent martial artist in Taiwan, not many martial artists know that he was even more prominent in religious circles. And it was because of his religious prominence that he was brought to Taiwan in the first place. He was a leader of the religious sect known as Yiguan Dao, which means consistent or unwavering way. The practice of Yiguan Dao refers to more of a philosophy than a religion. Wang Chijin states that after having spent a short time studying with Zhang Dong, he became interested in meditation, Buddhism, and becoming a vegetarian. Wang Chujin became an Iguan Taoist when he was in his early 20s. It's not known if Zhang Dong was an Iguan Taoist. So here's a little bit more about Iguan Dao. It says Iguan Dao, which is a practice based on Taoist philosophy, but embraces all five major religions of China: Taoism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and Confucianism. It sees them as differing expressions of the same universal and unwavering Tao. It originated in Shandong province, called the Pre-Heaven Great Way.
hmm.
Yeah, interesting. It says the original name of it was Shantian Da Dao. So pre-heaven, big Dao. And it said, okay, so here we are. In 1928, the mainland government suppressed the religion. This was due partially to the fact that members of the five major religions were a bit unnerved by people who accepted all the various religions as holding equal truth. So you're right, the Kuomintang was already busy suppressing the shit out of these guys. And and that's bad enough, but communism like banned it outright. So there's
Right.
both sides of the Civil War hate you pretty much. So
Yeah.
that's not great. So they were banned. So they were suppressed in 1928, and then 20 years later, Wang Shijin leaves mainland. So they were clearly still strong as hell,
Right.
which is interesting. It just shows how weak both sides of the government
And it
were at
takes a
that
while
time.
for society to fully collapse, I think.
Right. To completely stamp out your religion might take a while. It says here also that there were many influential people in society and in martial arts who belonged to Iguandao, and the government felt uneasy, not knowing what these people were up to at their meetings.
Mm.
Sect members were put under surveillance by the government, and as a result, the practitioners of Iguandao had to go underground and form a somewhat secret society. At one point in time, during the late 1920s and early 30s, there was an organized government persecution of Iguan Daoists in Tianjin, and several of the well-known martial arts practitioners who were also Iguan Daoists left the city at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tianjin. That reminds me of that Green Gang type of scene
Oh
where,
yeah, they were big. That was more in Shanghai, but
okay, that's Shanghai, right, right.
they were connected in the same way. I mean,
Right. So there's all these groups that are doing either nice things like religion or bad things like crime or in between things that
right.
mix the
It's like you
two, kind
got
of.
the cops, the criminals, the churches. I mean, it's
And
all
all three of them have members that are members of all
right.
three,
It's
right?
all yeah, exactly, and they're all interwoven, but through certain people.
Right. The
So,
government, the criminals, the
I
cops,
mean,
the
that's why one of the big things that um, the communists really got, why they got popular is they were sort of anti-corruption and they were like, hey,
sure.
look, we'll get rid
Fuck
of
these
all of
guys.
this
Yeah.
because they were, I mean, the level of corruption in China at that time was
Beyond. Yeah.
mind-boggling. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of years of entrenched, like
Interconnection
yeah,
between
I mean, talk about
the legal and the
nepotism,
illegal.
like it
Yeah.
was right. I mean, so it's like,
Horrible. And the people are suffering horribly. Plus decades of wars. I mean, come on. You're just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
let's start with a clean slate and screw all these guys.
Right. And
But
I think that was really popular to, that, I mean, it always is.
I mean, the promise of communism is great. Let's all team up and like
Sure.
throw out the rich people and start,
Well,
and share everything. But then it turns out to be a disaster once you actually do it. So it says when the nationalist government moved to Taiwan, the government surveillance policy continued. And so when Wang Chujin came to Taiwan, his role in Iguandao was kept secret from most people. Wang's role in Iguandao in Taiwan was that of a full priest. As such, he kept his head shaved, never married, and was a strict vegetarian. He ran an Iguandao group in Taichung and would later also lecture at other Iguandao temples around the island. Interesting. So that's why he's bald all the time.
hmm.
That's
I
Buddhist
mean,
priests always have to shave their head.
he may have also been bald, but
Yeah, along with that. And so, but yeah, so he kept that a little on the low pro.
but that's where our teacher, that's where he first learned a lot of the stuff, the sexual meditation stuff, for example, and some of the
Sure.
weirder, Taoist meditation stuff he learned was in Wang Shujing's group. I mean, or at least he said
Religious
Wang
group,
Shujing
yeah.
introduced him to a group of people, and
Right.
so I think there was, that sort of. Even now, I'm sure there are layers to the your access if you join one of these
Sure.
groups, right? So,
Well, yeah, it seems like Wang was recruiting on the side at his martial arts school. If you were
right.
a promising individual. Well, and what's funny is this right here on the same page, there's a picture of Wang Shijin's teacher, Zhang Xiaodong, and his head's completely shaved.
Hmm.
Just throwing that out there.
E.
But and so maybe there was some recruiting going on at his school or whatever. So
Wouldn't be surprised.
these things are all interwoven, obviously.
Dallas, they're tricky, man.
Okay, that's it for now. We're gonna shift over to the Patreon episode.
Hey, folks, hope you enjoyed the episode. Again, check out the Patreon for bonus episodes, extended episodes, interviews, and more. It's $5 a month to join or $10 for the full membership archive. So, again, thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting us. Take care of yourselves and be well.